The new CEO fired me in our first one-on-one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I just watched this kid, the son of my old manager, tell me I was no longer a fit, while I quietly owned 82% of the company he thought he ran. You can decide if what I did next was petty or just overdue. I've spent most of my career in the background. I'm the guy who knows where the cables are buried, who has the vendor's cell number, who can tell you why the warehouse loses 3 pallets every quarter, just by looking at the loading dock for 10 minutes. 9 years ago, when this all started, it was just me, my manager, and a leased office that still smelled like the previous tenant's burnt coffee. He was Mr. Larson to everyone else, Tom to me. He had the relationships, the sales charm, the ability to walk into a room and walk out with a signed contract. I had spreadsheets, processes, and a bad habit of asking, "Okay, but how exactly?" He'd joke, "You make it work, I'll make it rain." And for a while, that deal was fair. We both worked insane hours. We both took smaller paychecks to keep the lights on. He put his house on the line. I put my time and eventually my savings. The first time we couldn't afford my full salary, Tom slid a stack of papers across my desk. "Look, Mark," he said, rubbing his forehead, "I can't pay you what you're worth right now. Take this equity grant. When we get through this year, it'll be worth more than the difference." I read it, line by line. I'm not a lawyer, but numbers I understand. 5% vesting over 2 years, on top of the 3% I already had. It wasn't crazy. It was a bet that we'd still be alive in 2 years. "Are you sure about the percentage?" I asked. "If I lose you, there is no company," he said. "So yeah, I'm sure." That was the first step. Then came the second year, when a silent partner wanted out and Tom didn't have the cash to buy him. The bank didn't like our credit. I did the unglamorous thing. I pulled money out of my retirement account. We papered up a bridge loan through me, and in return I got his 12% at a discount. "You're crazy," Tom told me, "but I'm grateful." "I'm not crazy," I said. "I just don't like gambling with one die when I can hold two." By year 4, we had real revenue, staff, an actual HR department that could send passive-aggressive emails about refrigerator etiquette. But we also had debt and a recession that scared the hell out of our smaller shareholders. One by one, they came into Tom's office to explore options. One by one, he turned around and came to mine. "If we don't buy them out, they'll tank morale," he'd say. "We need stability." "Who's we?" I'd ask. He'd look at me tired. "You and me, like always." That's how slowly, boringly, I ended up with more and more pieces of the pie. 1% here, 5 there, bought cheap because everyone thought we were one bad quarter away from folding. Tom signed off on every deal. He was still the face. I was still the guy in the back polishing the engine. By the time the dust settled, Tom held a sizable chunk. I held a much bigger one. The others were scattered crumbs. We never talked about it in dramatic terms. For him, it was survival. For me, it was math. I never asked to sit in his chair. I liked my side of the building, operations, logistics, the hum of servers and forklifts, and people who actually knew what they were doing. Then Tom got sick. They called it minor complications at first. A procedure, then a second procedure, then a leave of absence that stretched from weeks into months. HR drafted bland announcements. The board asked polite questions. Behind closed doors, I saw the reality. He was tired, scared, and starting to talk about succession. He had one son. I had known Ethan since he was tall enough to steal cookies off the catering trays. The kid grew up around the office, then went away to business school. Came back with expensive shoes and loud confidence. "I'm going to take this thing global," he told me at a Christmas party, slurring slightly. "Dad thinks too small? You'll see." I smiled and took his keys away before he tried to drive home. Tom loved his son. That was never in question. Whether he trusted him was murkier. One night, maybe 6 months before everything blew up, Tom and I sat in his office. He looked older in that chair than I'd ever seen him. "Board likes the idea of Ethan stepping up," he said quietly. "They think it'll reassure the clients. keep continuity. And you? I asked. He stared at his hands. I think he still believes leadership is a costume, not a job. But blood is blood. They're not going to vote for the operations guy over the founder's son. He wasn't wrong. I didn't want the spotlight. And the board didn't want to explain to investors why the guy who usually fixed warehouse software suddenly had the title of CEO. So I said the thing that seemed fairest. Then let him have the title. I'll keep the place from burning down. Tom gave me this long look. You know you technically own more of this place than I do, right? I know, I said. And I also know that if I walk around acting like I do, Ethan will hate me on sight. Let him have the story. I'll keep the structure. I thought I was being smart, humble, whatever word you like. I thought staying invisible was the safest way to keep the company healthy until Ethan grew into the role or someone more qualified appeared. I misjudged just how much damage an insecure man with a shiny title can do in a very short time. Tom officially stepped down 3 months later for health reasons. The board announced Ethan as the new CEO with a glossy email, a staged photo, and a lot of vague language about vision and next chapters. Day 1, under Ethan's rules, started with an all-hands meeting. He walked onto the stage like a man who'd practiced that walk in every reflective surface he'd ever passed. Slim-fit suit, designer watch, a smile tuned exactly to Instagram. He talked about disruption, synergy, shaking off old habits, all the buzzwords you use when you don't yet understand where the money actually comes from. I stood in the second row with the other department heads, hands in my pockets, watching. When he said, "Some of you have been here since the beginning," he gestured vaguely toward my side of the room, not at me. And I respect that, he added, like the word left a bad taste. After the meeting, his assistant pinged me. Ethan would like a one-on-one. Conference room B in 10? I walked in on time. He made me wait 3 minutes, just enough to send a message. He didn't stand up when I entered. "Mark," he said, leaning back in the chair, "we finally get to talk." "We've talked plenty," I said, "just not with you sitting in that chair." He smiled too wide. "Exactly. That's what I want to address. New chapter. New expectations." He started with compliments, all in the past tense. "You were instrumental in getting us through the early days. You were invaluable when Dad was figuring things out. You've been a rock." Then came the but, sharp and practiced. "But I'm looking at where we're headed, and honestly, your style is dated. You're cautious. You're slow to adopt change. The team sees you as Dad's guy. That's not the energy I want around me." I let him talk. I watched the way his fingers drummed on the table when he said, "My company." I counted 3 times. "So what do you want to happen here?" I asked when he paused. He exhaled like he was doing something noble. "I think it's best if we part ways. Clean break. HR has a package ready for you. We'll position it as a mutual decision. You get a nice send-off. I get to build my own team." There it was. The kid firing the man who'd signed his first intern paperwork. "You're firing your operations director on your first day," I said, just to hear it out loud. "I'm setting a tone," he corrected. "No hard feelings. You've done a lot." He slid an envelope across the table like this was a scene he'd always wanted to act out. I looked at it. I didn't open it. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay?" "Okay," I repeated, standing up. "You're the CEO." He seemed almost disappointed that I didn't argue, didn't beg him to reconsider, didn't throw a chair. He had no idea that while he owned the title on the door, I owned everything behind it. But that was only the first step toward him finding out who he had really decided to mess with. When I walked out of that conference room, envelope still sealed in my hand, the office looked different. Not physically. Same carpet, same overhead lights that hummed just a little too loud. But the people, their eyes, the way they tracked me and then pretended not to. HR avoided eye contact, which was funny in a dark way. They were the ones who'd emailed me that morning asking for updated vacation balances. Guess they needed to prep the paperwork in advance. I took the long way to my office, passing the bullpen. A few employees nodded at me, tight smiles like I'd already become a ghost, and they were trying to pretend I hadn't passed through them. When I reached my office, my nameplate was still there. Silver, centered, a small mercy, though I knew Ethan would change it before lunch. I sat down, closed the door, looked around at a decade of my life, the whiteboard covered in timelines, the project binder with a dozen sticky notes still marking urgent tasks, the half-finished performance reviews I'd been writing for people who genuinely deserved better leadership than what they were about to get. I set the envelope on the desk, didn't open it, didn't need to. Whatever was inside had no weight compared to the stack of voting rights in my home safe. At 11:14 a.m., HR sent the official email, Leadership Update. 2 lines in, it said I had chosen to pursue new opportunities. I actually laughed. I sat there alone and laughed. After all these years, they thought they could write me out of my own company, with a template and a euphemism. 10 minutes later, I saw Ethan through the glass walls, walking the floor with that swagger he'd perfected. He shook hands, clapped people on the shoulders, leaned against desks like a motivational speaker who'd read exactly one book. Every step he took hit the same nerve. He paused at a cubicle near mine, talking loudly to a junior analyst about future-proofing workflows. He knew I could hear. He wanted me to. I didn't move. Didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. He left eventually, satisfied with whatever imaginary throne he thought he'd climbed onto. The office felt smaller, not because I had lost something, but because the building finally reflected what it had quietly become over the past year. A place built on my labor, now run by someone who had no idea how to even read the schematics. At noon, I packed my personal things, not much. A coffee mug from the early days, a couple binders, a framed photo from year 3, back when Tom still believed the business was a shared dream, not a legacy he could hand down like a wristwatch. While I was zipping my laptop bag, the door opened. It was Claire, head of HR, usually polished, confident, the kind of woman who could escort a CFO out of the building without breaking stride, except now she looked uneasy. "Do you need help with anything?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just leaving." She hesitated. "Mark?" "For what it's worth?" I didn't agree with this. "You don't have to agree," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "You just have to follow instructions." Her jaw tightened. A flicker of guilt or shame or both. She stepped aside to let me pass. Walking out of that office didn't feel like an ending. It felt like stepping out of someone else's delusion. Outside, the air was warmer than it had been in days. I unlocked my car, slid in, and sat there for a long moment with my hands on the wheel. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Please return company assets to HR by end of day. Also, let's keep this professional." I stared at it. The arrogance, the casual condescension, the kid truly thought he'd done something brilliant. I started the engine, and then I stopped it. Again. Because something in me shifted. Not anger, not grief. Something colder. A realization I hadn't felt in full until that exact second. He thought he'd fired an employee, but I wasn't an employee. I was the majority owner he'd just tried to humiliate. That thought settled in my chest like a stone in water. I drove straight home, straight into the garage, closed the door behind me. My house was quiet. Maybe for the first time in my adult life, that silence felt like permission. I walked into the small office by the hallway, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a hardbound folder, the kind lawyers insist on using, even though it's 2 steps away from being a medieval spell book. Inside, my original equity grant, the bridge loan agreement, the silent partner buyout, vesting confirmations, 6 signed contracts representing 6 exits from minority shareholders. And the last one, the final transfer from Tom, executed when he needed liquidity for his treatment. I flipped through them slowly, not because I'd forgotten. I never forget numbers, but because I wanted to feel the weight of each piece. 82%. Not theoretical, not symbolic. Real ownership. Controlling ownership. I sat down, pressed my thumb against the corner of the final document, and exhaled. Tom had trusted me. The others had underestimated me. Ethan, he never even looked. I knew what had to happen next. I grabbed my phone and called my attorney. "Mark?" he answered on the second ring. "You okay? HR emailed me earlier. Something about transition paperwork." "Yeah," I said. "I was fired." A silence. Sharp. Heavy. Then, "He fired you?" "Day one." Another pause. Then he let out a breath that sounded like a fuse being lit. "Well," he said, calm but electric, "then we're invoking the voting clause. That's why I'm calling. When do you want the emergency shareholder meeting?" "As soon as legally possible." He didn't even hesitate. "Then tonight I'll draft the notice. You'll sign digitally. They'll get it first thing in the morning." "Good. Mark," he added, voice lowering, "you know what this means." "I know exactly what it means." I hung up, sat back, let the next wave of clarity settle. Because that was the moment Ethan's fate actually shifted. Not when he fired me, not when he sent that smug text, but right there, in my house, with those documents spread like a quiet verdict across my desk. He thought today was his first day as CEO. He didn't realize it was his last. The emergency shareholder notice went out at 7:12 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee still too hot to drink, when my attorney forwarded the delivery confirmations. Every board member, every minor shareholder, and Ethan. The subject line was simple, clinical. Request for extraordinary meeting under voting authority. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. Just the kind of email that makes people straighten in their chairs before they finish reading. By 8 a.m., my phone started vibrating. Calls from numbers I recognized, numbers I didn't, numbers the company had used when it didn't want things traced back to itself. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I got dressed, shaved, put on the same navy shirt I wore the day we closed our first big contract years ago, and drove to the building like it was any other ordinary Wednesday. Inside, the atmosphere felt electrified. Whispers in hallways, people opening and closing Slack threads too quickly, HR moving faster than usual, but trying not to look like they were moving faster than usual. When I reached the elevator, Ray, one of the senior engineers, stepped in beside me. He looked at me with this odd mix of worry and anticipation. "You coming to the meeting?" he asked. "I called it," I said. He blinked twice. "So that email was real?" "Very." He nodded slowly, almost respectfully, and didn't ask anything else. The boardroom was already half full when I pushed open the glass door. A dozen faces snapped toward me. Some anxious, some relieved, some calculating. Tom wasn't there, of course. He was home, recovering from the latest round of treatments. But his empty chair in the corner felt as heavy as a person. Ethan walked in 2 minutes later. He looked like he hadn't slept. Or maybe he'd tried to, then stared at the ceiling, imagining scenarios he wasn't prepared for. His hair was messy. His tie was crooked. He carried a laptop he didn't seem to know how to hold. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered as he took a seat at the head of the table, the same chair his father used to occupy. My attorney opened the meeting with the steady tone of a surgeon before a complicated operation. "As majority shareholder," he said, "Mr. Harker has invoked his right to call this session. The first order of business—" Ethan cut him off. "This is insane. Mark doesn't have that kind of authority." My attorney didn't even look at him. He simply tapped a button on the projector, and the screen lit up with a spreadsheet. Clean, merciless numbers. Shareholder stakes. M. Harker, 82.04%. T. Larson, 11.7%. Remaining shareholders, 6.26% combined. The room froze. Even the hum of the HVAC seemed to pause. Ethan's face drained of color so quickly it was almost scientific. "That's not right," he stammered. "Dad owns more than that. He said, this can't be accurate." "It's accurate," I said softly. "Every transfer was signed by your father. every vesting schedule approved by the board, every buyout filed with the state. Ethan looked around the room like someone would rescue him. No one moved. I wasn't here to humiliate him publicly, but I was here to end the damage. "We'll proceed," my attorney continued. "The agenda includes evaluation of leadership, review of yesterday's termination, and a confidence vote in the current CEO. Ethan slammed his palms against the table. "You can't just fire me because you're upset." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't fire you when you were upset." Someone near the back snorted before quickly covering it. The HR director spoke up next, carefully, like a person choosing steps across a minefield. "Ethan," she said, "your decision yesterday put the company at substantial operational risk. Removing the head of operations on day one, without consulting the board or your COO, created exposure we're still trying to quantify." He stared at her like she'd betrayed him. "You agreed with me yesterday." She didn't blink. "I agreed that HR would process your directive. I didn't agree with the directive." Ethan turned to the CFO. Tell them we're fine." The CFO shifted uncomfortably. "Yesterday already triggered client escalations. 2 accounts requested stability assurances, and 1 actually asked if Mark was still with us." Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "But Mo, I'm the CEO," he said, voice cracking. "My decisions should stand." "Only if the shareholders allow them," I said. He whirled toward me. "You're doing this because you're angry." "No," I replied. "I'm doing this because yesterday you fired the person who keeps the company alive, and because you did it for ego, not strategy." A quiet pulse moved through the room. Relief from some, awe from others. I scanned the table. "You want transparency?" I said. "Here it is. I've kept this place stable while your father was sick. I've kept it solvent during recessions. I've bought out shareholders so we wouldn't fracture into infighting. I didn't ask for a title. I didn't ask for recognition. But what I won't do is let you burn your father's legacy to the ground because you think a business is a movie set." Ethan swallowed hard. The room didn't move. Then something unexpected happened. One of the junior shareholders, a quiet woman who rarely spoke, raised her hand. "I want it on record," she said, "that removing Mark was reckless, and that continued leadership under Ethan puts our investment at risk." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't back down. The operations manager followed, then the HR director, then the CFO. One after another, the people who'd held their breath for 24 hours finally exhaled. Ethan looked around like the walls were closing in. "You're all cowards," he snapped. "Dad built this company. I'm the future of it." "No," I said quietly. "Your father built it. I kept it alive. And you walked in thinking respect comes prepackaged with a job title." A board member cleared his throat. "I think we're ready for the vote." The vote took less than 30 seconds. Majority rule doesn't take long when the majority sits on one side of the table. My attorney typed the results into the record. Motion to remove Ethan Larson as CEO. Passed. Motion to revoke all executive authority. Passed. Motion to appoint interim leadership pending board recommendation. Passed. Ethan pushed back from the table so violently the chair skidded. "You'll regret this," he spat. "All of you." I stood. "No," I said. "The only regret here is that it took me 1 day too long to fix your mistake." He stormed out, slamming the glass door so hard a ripple shot through the pane. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. Then slowly, people began to breathe again. But the calm wasn't real yet. It was just the eye of the storm. Because while removing Ethan was necessary, it wasn't the end. It was the moment before the world rearranged itself, and I wasn't done rebuilding it. When the boardroom finally emptied, I stayed behind. Not for dramatic effect, just to breathe in a room that for the first time in months didn't feel like it belonged to someone pretending to be in charge. The window overlooked the loading dock. I'd watched that dock since the days when we rented forklifts by the hour. Trucks arrived, trucks left. People who actually understood the business kept it moving. Those people were the reason I never wanted the title. Titles don't move freight. People do. By noon, HR had drafted the official internal announcement, leadership adjustment, an interim transition plan. Clinical, dry, the kind of thing employees skim on their lunch break and then whisper about by the coffee machine. I approved it with a single sentence. Remove unnecessary adjectives. They did. The board asked if I wanted the CEO role. They asked it with a rehearsed politeness, the kind that already assumed my answer. I didn't take it. I didn't even consider it. I'm staying where I belong, I said. Find someone who wants the spotlight. I just want control of the wiring. They laughed, a few of them, not disrespectfully, more like relief, like the company's spine had shifted back into place. By the end of the day, the interim leadership plan named our CFO as acting CEO, a real adult, someone who understood how a business breathes. HR began drafting contracts. The operations team resumed the projects Ethan had frozen, and the chaos drained out of the building the way water drains from a cracked roof after years of pressure. I walked the floor that afternoon, not as a returning hero, not as a man reclaiming a throne. Just me. The guy who checks if the server room temperature looks right because no one else ever thinks to look. People approach me with quiet nods, quick thank yous, half-whispered glad you're back. I didn't bask in any of it, because here's the truth people forget. Respect feels different when you didn't demand it. At 4:20 p.m., as I was reviewing vendor contracts, security pinged me. Visitor at reception asking for you. I knew who it was before they said the name. I walked down the hall, past the awards case we'd earned before Ethan ever printed his first business card, and into the lobby. Ethan stood there, shoulders forward, jaw tight, eyes red from anger or sleep, or both. He wasn't yelling anymore. That part of him had burned out. You ruined my future, he said quietly. No, I answered. Your decisions did. I just stopped the damage from spreading. He looked smaller than he had that morning, not physically, but in that way people shrink when the world finally stops giving them the benefit of the doubt. My father trusted you, he said. He still does, I replied. Or you wouldn't be talking to me right now instead of him? He flinched. For a moment he wasn't a CEO or a villain or a symbol of nepotism. He was just a son who'd been handed something he didn't know how to carry, and broke it the second he touched it. But pity doesn't fix a company, and pity doesn't undo arrogance. Where am I supposed to go now? He asked. Someplace where your last name doesn't matter, I said. It'll be the best thing that ever happens to you if you let it. He didn't respond, didn't argue. He just turned, pushed through the glass doors, and walked into the parking lot like a man who suddenly realized he didn't know how to walk without a shadow. I watched him leave because some endings deserve to be acknowledged. Then I went back upstairs. Because the world doesn't pause after justice. It resets. Over the next week, the company settled into a rhythm it hadn't known in a long time. The interim CEO restored processes Ethan had dismantled in a single afternoon. Clients stopped calling in a panic. The sales team went back to meetings where they didn't have to explain unpredictable leadership decisions. HR reopened positions Ethan had frozen because they didn't align with his personal vision. No drama, just work. Tom called me 3 days later. His voice sounded thin but warm. Thank you, he said. Not for saving his son. I think he knew his son wasn't the one who needed saving. But for protecting the company he'd built before the cancer started stealing parts of him. I told him the truth. I'm just keeping the gears aligned, he laughed softly. That's always been your job. We didn't talk about percentages. We didn't talk about authority. Some things exist beneath language. A month later, the board named the CFO as permanent CEO. Unanimous vote, including mine. My role didn't change on paper. Same title, same office. I didn't need anything more. Ownership isn't loud. Real power doesn't shout. It just sits quietly in the corner of a room and bends outcomes without raising its voice. Every now and then, I hear things about Ethan. He moved to a mid-level manager role in a logistics firm across the city. A real job, with real expectations. No inherited authority, no throne to fall from. His father told me he's adjusting, which is the polite word for learning humility, one long shift at a time. I don't take joy in that, but I take peace in it. There's a difference. My days are simple now. I wake up early. I walk into a company that listens when it needs to and works when it should. The hallways feel settled. The people feel grounded. And the silence, the good kind, has returned. Somewhere in a file cabinet is a folder with documents totaling 82% of this place. I don't think about it often. It's not a trophy. It's not leverage. It's a reminder. A reminder that power used quietly is often more dangerous than power used loudly. A reminder that revenge isn't fire, it's shape. And a reminder that the calm after the storm isn't emptiness, it's clarity. I didn't win anything. I didn't defeat anyone. I just stopped carrying things that weren't mine. And in the space that opened, everything finally lined up the way it always should have.